Let's create a shot.
I recently have been focusing on expanding one of my product CGI projects that I have done in the past. For instance, I have been adding new SKUs for the product, and I also have been creating key visuals. If you don't know what key visual is, it's the main image that would present the product in a public domain. For the cherries SKU, I have come up with this idea where the bottle is placed on a shallow liquid surface and the cherries are falling on it, creating a ripple effect across the surface and giving a little bit more detail to it. And this actually proved to be a very difficult task to create in Blender. In broad strokes, I thought this would be a combination between dynamic paint and rigid bodies. And for the cherry model, I applied a dynamic paint brush and also rigid bodies. This seemed to be challenging for Blender to understand what I wanted to do because it made cherry model jump around. It took me a long time to figure out how to actually make this work. After a long trial and error, I came up with the idea where I parent a low poly sphere within the cherry model. And in this way, I can separate both simulations, pairing the cherry itself with the rigid body and the sphere with the dynamic paint simulation. This definitely helped with the simulation to actually appear the way I wanted, like where the cherry is actually having a little bit of a friction, it doesn't bounce around. The next technical challenge that I came across with this whole setup was that actually dynamic paint didn't show up in the render. And I was looking through the forums trying to see what is the reason, if there's something switched off in the render engine, and I couldn't find any good solution for it. So the only solution I could find is to actually just apply the simulation to a certain frame, which is not the worst thing if you are doing still images, but I also want to create an animation for these products. And I can't keep freezing every frame of dynamic paint, it's just not a viable way to do this workflow. So what are the solutions? In this video, I will be going through the liquid simulation setup instead of using dynamic paint and see how we can achieve as realistic simulation where a cherry drops on a shallow liquid surface as possible. Wish me luck. Let's now switch to our screen and let's look through our model and what we can do. So we have opened our file where we have our set scene. I have removed the dynamic paint surface and we are going to now set up a low resolution liquid simulation so we can work with that. And then hopefully we can get the rigid bodies work exactly the way we want. Here I am setting a low resolution liquid simulation, starting with domain to be at 32 resolution. I am adding the flow object, which is a slim rectangle to create a shallow liquid. Enable fluid simulation and set it to liquid. Keep flow behavior to geometry, which only uses the volume of the rectangle. Set mesh to be planar and enable initial velocity. After some tests, I discovered to set normal to at least 2 under initial velocity. This helps with the water splashes. Don't forget to set cherries to be effectors in a fluid simulation so it interacts with the liquid. I set up low resolution liquid simulation and it seems to be working. It seems to be interacting with the cherries as well, which is great. Obviously, because it is low resolution simulation, the voxel size is way too big, so we are going to subdivide it more to see how that affects it before I do mesh baking. I increased the resolution to 128, which definitely gave a better result, but is still not good enough. So I have increased the resolution, but the particles are still quite large, even at 128, which makes me think that I actually need to scale everything up and then make the simulation work, because it just like increases the baking time a lot if I'm just keep going in the divisions. And even though like I am at the moment baking just 50 frames, and I think that's probably what I will only need for certain frames, I will just select everything, increase the size, apply the scale. It's starting to look like what I want, but before I actually bake the mesh, I just want to make sure it's somewhat accurate in just particles itself. I increased the scale of a whole scene 10 times. This obviously threw lighting and other things out of balance.
hold on a minute.
So now that I have increased the size of everything, the next problem is that the rigid body simulation has messed up. What I'm gonna do is actually go back before I apply the scale to everything and see if that works. If that doesn't work, I probably will just delete all the cherry copies and just do one, make sure that's correct, and then just populate it back again. This turns out to be a little bit more involved than I wanted it to be, but I want to continue develop my animation skills, and simulation is one of the parts that I really want to get into more.
And surely I got more into the mess. I ended up redoing the most of rigid body simulation as I couldn't find the reasons why cherries were snapping to the 3D cursor. As I was starting to see the light at the end of this tunnel, I ran into another technical challenge. As I started to fine-tune the liquid simulation, Blender seemed to not like the baking process after some time. It only crushed at the last frame of the liquid simulation. I tried to find the fault of it, but without success. So I decided to play a trick with Blender. I set the simulation to modular and that it is resumable, so I can stop the liquid simulation just a couple frames short to the finish line. I am aware that it is not the proper way to doing it, but it was my best solution I could come up with in a limited time frame. And with all this trouble, this is our final result. So the final setup for the whole simulation is, starting with the rigid bodies. Floor is set to be passive with a collision shape of convex hull, friction is set to 1 and bounciness is set to 0.05. Collision margin is 5 mm. For the cherries, rigid body simulation is set to be active with a collision shape of mesh. Friction is set to be 0.15 and bounciness to be set at 0.1. Collision margin is set to 4 mm. And final liquid simulation setup is, domain is set to be 175 resolution divisions. Mesh is enabled and set with upraise to be 3 and particle radius to be 1.5. Under cache, baking type is set to be modular with is resumable enabled. To enable it, set the baking type first to be all and the option to be resumable will be active. Then change it back to be modular. For the water surface, change the type to flow, set the flow type to be liquid, flow source to be mesh with is planar enabled. Under initial velocity, change normal to be 1.5. For the cherries, enable fluid simulation and change the type to be effector. Make sure effector type is collision and is set to be is planar. And this is the final setup for the simulation.
So this is the final result for the simulation. I actually didn't expect it to be this difficult to set it all out and fine-tune it, but this is the result, and now I can continue setting out all the scenes for the final animation reel. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, subscribe to my channel if you want to see more videos like this where I break down technical challenges to achieve my creative vision. Comment down below if there's any specific parts that you would like to see. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!